Welcome to the Challenge A. We just started. The goal, as you can see here, is really if and how we can reach levels of assurance of our devices and system we use currently for everyday use that are meaningful from a constitutional point of view, from a civil rights point of view. And currently, high assurance is the coolest term, and so we need to find a new term. Because we're really quite far from that. So these devices need to be user-friendly. Not only need to be this level, but because people should be able, every person should be able to use it. We don't want only the richest people or military people should do it, but citizens, if we want to retain democracy, should have radically higher levels of assurance and should not require trust, blind trust on innumerable actors on which trust is needed to be placed today. Now I know the technology, from the CPU to the standardization to the fabrication. Bart knows about standardization. He was part of a body that was set up from NIST after it was proven that NSA influenced the creation of broken standards. They set up an international panel to how to solve that. Well, it's easy how to solve that, but then maybe the political idea will is not so easy to get. So we're going to be focusing on what paradigm and standards will actually be able to do so. And so some would challenge that this would be even possible to do. And maybe one hint of the possible direction is what Bruce Schneider said here last year. He said the direction should be oversight, transparency, and accountability. So if we take these paradigms that we all know about now and we carry them all the way through to all the elements, maybe we could go somewhere. But I think we should have one more thing. We need to have an extreme minimization of these systems. We will never be able to ensure a device which have 10 million lines of code and incredibly complex transistor and critical systems. So you could have €1 billion to verify. You will never be able to, because a comma could change and constitute a backdoor. So the only thing we could ever do is possibly get some really minimal computing, which is also portable and user-friendly. Of course, we couldn't do all the computing to that level. So this is the frame that we're looking at. But anyway, the challenge to frame this they're quite specific. So all panelists will be welcome to challenge the question and maybe treat the issue more generally. Thanks to Jennifer, and okay.
Thank you. And actually, perhaps give the microphone. Our panellists here, Jovan has already spoken, we've heard from him. This is Koen Maris, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Atos, and of course Belgium's resident cryptographer, Bart Preneel from the University of Leuven. Koen, let me start with you. Perhaps you could give an initial reaction to everything that Rufo has set out.
If I look at the challenge, my first part would be, is it affordable? We at Atos, we build hardware on European soil. I would say yes, it could be affordable if there is mass production. But if I look at is it user-friendly? I don't think so, to be honest. If I look at how users react today to security, on all business perspectives and on all business layers, anything that has to do with security they see as a break. And that's the perception today. We can think that it's user-friendly by following a certain procedure, but users that are not IT literate do not see it already that way. And we see that security is perceived as something that breaks them in doing that. If we look at a car, for example, in the 80s, for people that are driving already a long time, we didn't had to wear a security belt. When that was introduced, it was perceived as very negative, even though it saves your life. Still today, people are refusing to wear that security belt. So you see, user-friendliness is something that is very hard to achieve when it comes to security. So at this stage, I would say to the first one, yes. But to the second part, I would say no. I don't see it to become user-friendly. This is my opinion and view that I see among big companies and organizations that even today are ignorant to security. I was at a customer in the beginning of this week, and he asked me for a DLP solution, data loss prevention, data leak prevention. And my first question was, so where is your data stored today? And we are talking a 10,000 user company, and he replied to me, Google Drive. So he was looking for a very lean IT organization, and Google Drive is very user-friendly. But if we now start to add security to it, it becomes a lot more complicated to use, even on your mobile phones, on your laptops, because users like to use it everywhere. So the user-friendliness will fail in that retrospect. So that's my view.
Art, do you agree?
Yes and no. I think it's complex because in the end, the question is, what is user friendliness? I mean, if something is easy to use, then if that's your definition, yes, it will be a bit harder to use. Although on the other hand, I've been using Signal for a while. I find it very easy to use. It's as easy to use as all the other messaging apps. I think a well-designed system can be secure and easy to use, but of course there is certain restrictions. So, but I don't think that's where the bottleneck is. I think the challenges are in just technical solutions. I mean, how to build more secure systems. I mean, there was quite some work on this. There was even a book written in the 80s, how to build a secure computer system. But we kind of abandoned this in the 90s for the features of Windows 95, which were usability, fonts, and all these kind of things. We actually have not focused on this as a community. Neither, I think academics a bit more maybe, but industry itself has not been so interested in this question. So if there is security built in, it's, for example, in the mobile world, there is more security for the app ecosystem. But it's there to make the app ecosystem work, not to make the user more secure or to improve privacy. So I think it's more a matter of will in the ecosystem to build more security. What level of assurance we can go, there is of course a cost issue. We cannot go to the same level of assurance as the airline industry. So, but we have to find somewhere in between.
Well, I think you've touched on something. I mean, you said it's quite difficult to define what is user-friendly. I would take it back another step and say it's quite difficult to define what is the user, because your user may be a multi-billion corporation who have the time and money and will to protect the data, because otherwise it's a PR disaster. Whereas a user like me or my friends who actually don't know anything about tech but say, oh, I'll use WhatsApp because it's free. And that as a sort of bonus, they get security built in and they get privacy built in. But do you think that in defining different levels of users, should we be pitching this idea of privacy as a must-have at a different level? Cohen, you're shaking your head.
No. I don't think we should make a distinction between those. The first one is the incentive for that billion-dollar company is not to secure the data. It's to avoid problems in the press, to avoid reputational damage, because look at the ones that have been breached. Analysis reports from the anti-malware companies, there were about 15 malwares used to breach Target. Well, there are very few companies that have really suffered from a breach. There shouldn't be a distinction between it, because otherwise we get two-speed security.
If I may add to the previous point about being user-friendly. So it's a good point, but of course it is not restricted only to ultra-high insurance. So it is or ultra-secure devices. It's a general security issue because humans are on the top of the security chain. So in this sense, I don't think that these very secure systems and devices add on this some complexity or for users to be more difficult to use these devices. So I don't think that this is the point. So of course this is a general point we should always have in mind, and raising awareness about how to use systems. So this is quite normal. So this is what we should continue to do. But the point about this, I believe that of course you can reckon from my previous presentation, it is feasible. So the answer to this challenge, we should at least start the efforts. So we should try to build this secure software and hardware systems. Of course, the simplicity and minimization is one of the criteria, and this is now currently lacking. We had a situation after the Second World War similar with crypto algorithms for about 20 years. Everything proprietary, so totally closed to public, and then it changed with standards, with public scrutiny, all these things. We have now much better situation in terms of crypto algorithms and protocols. We should have something similar for hardware and software security. Now it's totally missing. For example, in EIT Digital, we developed for cloud business. The critical software is the hypervisor software that in fact handles, manages the individual virtual machines. So, for example, we have very simple hypervisors for which you can prove security in some formal models. And then with these hypervisors, you can also detect the real threats, are so-called advanced persistent threats in computing devices. You can also detect those. So basically, but they are not, of course, standardized. They are not open to public, but they can be used like for connected cars, for high secure phones, and this. So we need this. I believe there are experts in this area, like in crypto algorithms. We should also do the similar thing in hardware security and software security.
Well, I mean, you said it's user-friendly. I mean, in terms of, as I say, general users, I mean, setting up PGP for your email is a pain in the ass. I mean, it takes time. It's not that straightforward. And you would only do it if you were already alerted and aware of you know, your need to protect your data. I mean, but if I tried to persuade my mum to do it, there is no way. Absolutely no way. So, I mean, I think we already have this two-tier system that you mentioned.
I mean, email is a particularly bad example because we don't know how to do it, but messaging, we seem to know how to do it. So I think a secure messaging app can be very easy to use.
Yeah.
I mean, even calling, I mean, with what we learned in the press that actually Google removed security features of their new call app for, of course, more data analysis for better cool features like auto response, like who wants their phone to respond in their place. But in fact, it would be very easy for Google to make it end-to-end secure and easy to use. So I don't think that's the problem. The problem is more at the ecosystem level and the architecture. And of course, well, Apple doesn't use the advertising ecosystem as much, but they also want our data to fine-tune their systems. And so this seems to be tolerated that this ecosystem actually uses the user data, exploits the user data. And of course, then there's an inherent conflict. If you're in this model, then you have no incentive to protect privacy of user data. You want all the data. And the security breaches you take, you know, that adds to it as well. You have the data, so it may be breached at some stage. Well, that's too bad. That's for our ecosystem. So I think this ecosystem where money is made based on advertising and where we accept that to make systems cooler, we collect more data about everybody, and that will make the world a better place. Of course, this information can be used for the good, but also for the bad. But I think this is actually the core premise, is that we accept this ecosystem as we have it today, which grew out of business models in the 90s.
Okay. Well, you know, you're talking about data, and there's, you know, we can all name all the data-hungry organizations out there. It's pretty much all of them. But Jovan also raised an interesting issue with regard to autonomous vehicles and so forth. So what I want to talk a little bit is about the, I hate the phrase, but the Internet of Things. So it's not personal data we're talking about here. I mean, is there a sense where security is built into that sort of data exchange more regularly than into sort of personal private message exchange? Do we care more about our fridges and our cars than we do about ourselves?
I doubt that we as users care.
Yeah.
I mean, I received a new car very recently, and there is a SIM card in it. I asked the dealer, "What are you collecting?" and he couldn't answer me. I was probably the first to ask, and it's not the first car with a SIM card in it. So I suppose users do not care. I think in general, public does not care. Bart is right. The ecosystem in many companies is wrong and has the wrong business incentive, or perhaps from a business perspective, the right business incentive. But from a perspective of privacy and security, it's completely wrong. But users accept it. I mean, WhatsApp added encryption to the messaging, but I wonder how many users care about it. Did they have more users after adding encryption or less users? Nobody knows.
Well, apparently they lost quite a number of users when we heard the data was going to be shared with Facebook. So that,
of course,
so there's a certain level of people who care. but then there's everybody
yeah,
else.
yeah, and that level is not important enough to make a change or create a wave that changes or force the changes. So if you look at connected car manufacturers, what are they interested in? In having cheaper maintenance, being reported and alerted on time. That's for them IoT and connected cars. Of course, they are trying to add security by encrypting the data, but their biggest worry today is if they upload a new firmware, they have to be sure that it's the right firmware, etc. But their biggest concern is if somebody can read the firmware, because we all know the scandals that are going around emission values. That's their biggest worry today, not user data or privacy data. They are looking at that from a business perspective, not from a user security perspective. Far from it.
So first, a response to something you said about the ecosystem inside the company. Of course, it's a global ecosystem because the companies, they operate within the society, and society has tolerated this. And I think the problem should not be solved at the level of the company, but at the level of society. I think that's where the core of the problem is, because the companies operate within the legal framework we create, and if we tolerate that companies take over with their business incentives with public space, well, then we end up with the troubles we have today. Now, to come back to IoT, first, of course, there is also the privacy problem there, because what my car does, if it's self-driving or not, it also says a lot about what I do. And so it's actually also very personal, so I don't think we have the distinction privacy security there. It's also the two sides of the same coin. I think this is where it's going to happen, and I hate to be a Cassandra, but I think what we did is from the 90s onwards, we made our computer systems more connected, and we didn't increase security proportionally to it. We're now relying on it more and more, but to some extent, well, you know, I get a blue screen a few times a month, okay? But you kind of accept that. But of course, in your car, you wouldn't accept it if you're going at 120 kilometers per hour on the freeway. You get a blue screen, and the car, self-driving car, doesn't know what to do anymore, or it suddenly brakes. So you would not accept that. But of course, maybe the car is still something people will argue, well, there is now less death than before, so whatever, you know, these 500 people in Belgium who died before there were 1,000, so we improved. But I think our whole ecosystem will depend on technology, which is not ready to do this. So what I think is going to happen is that a state will end up without power for an extended period of time. And that means also no communications, no transportation, no food. I think at that moment, people will say, oh, this is actually a problem. Our economy now is so much dependent on this. And we'll have to go back and design secure systems, because it's definitely not the case that the processors put in the electricity network or the processors put in fridges or in cars are way more secure than the processors we have on our PCs or our phones or our laptops. So I think, and only then I think there will be the awareness in society. We have to go back and we have to actually make things not as secure as airplanes, but close to it, and start redesigning stuff from scratch. And it's not just allowed to what we have today. You have a cool gadget for fitness, for a thermostat, for whatever, all kind of things. You just plug it in and you see what happens. Oh, it's hacked. We just fix it. It's hacked again. We fix it again. It's hacked again. And this will not be possible anymore to work like this as soon as whole society and all our functioning of economy depends on it and everything is connected. But I'm afraid we're only going to get there to a big disaster, and not by planning or political will or decision of the European Parliament that from now on system should be much more secure.
Well, I hope you're wrong.
If I may just add a few things related to Internet of Things, so that's a very good point for privacy. Indeed, there are many efforts already in the security community related to the authentication of things. So we need, of course, you understand that the corporates are more interested in authentication than confidentiality. So there are already international standardization bodies dealing with scalable authentication of things. So there are already techniques for this. Instead, for privacy, for confidentiality, that component of privacy, there are less solutions. And in fact, what is interesting that this fully homomorphic encryption that Renaud will talk about after lunch can be used also in these constrained environments for Internet of Things. So there are new technologies, in fact, also for Internet of Things, but it is very important to have solutions for Internet of Things.
So,
Sensors, it's e-health data, wearables. It's very, very critical also for privacy, like also for elderly people when you start to develop first symptoms of dementia. So it is very, very sensitive data we need to protect. Currently, this is not protected well. So this is the current situation.
Are you as negative as Bart about the future, or a little bit more optimistic?
Well, I don't think, if we don't reverse the current trends in this area, I am very pessimistic about the future. So this is one of the objectives of this line of events, to try to change the directions. Whether we can succeed in that, you can already guess now, I mean, but we at least try.
I'm not pessimistic, I'm optimistic. Optimism is a moral duty. I'm optimistic it will be a disaster and then we'll fix it.
Fair enough. Okay. Merit, did you have a question? Did anyone in the room want to sort of raise any points or take this in a slightly different direction?
Actually, I think we could replace the word security here with the word quality. So, how to produce ultra high quality device, software, whatever. I'm not sure, it's possible. When you look at human beings and how they work, we all want more functionality, we will all want more. So this would have to be really something really, really basic. So maybe to achieve the goal, it would have to be targeted at a specific sector or specific application, because otherwise I don't see how my smartphone will be so ultra high secure or ultra high quality. I don't see it can happen. It's just not realistic.
Well, I'm glad you raised the point about the question of security, because this was something I wanted to come to. It's a difficult word to use because it can be skewed in so many ways and can be used to mean so many things. We've got security services who try to undermine our secure private communications. So it's maybe you're right in terms of using a different word.
Also, the other comment I want to do, like Bart said that the business model of the internet now is incompatible with levels of assurance that are meaningful. I think that in reality the problem is more a problem of the complexity that these systems require. Because I could imagine an ultra high assurance device, not like the one we're imagining, extremely simple and so on, which is based on advertising. They do collect personal information anyway. The problem is how this information is stored and collected. It's not that this information is safer on my device than it is on Google servers.
But aren't you making the assumption that that data, that picture that data paints, exists on your device, that it's all together? I mean, it's the aggregation of data that Google do that surely creates a target, if you will, for hackers.
No, I strongly disagree, I think, with what Rufo says about the fact that it doesn't matter where my data is stored. I mean, a concrete example, Google now has added an interface for location to the Android, which actually, so every app has to go to this interface. And so what happens now is if you want to protect your location from an app, you can block your location, but then you can no longer use Google Maps.
I think Bart has a point, of course. They are driving you, or they force users to do certain things. But of course, users choose here the option not privacy, but user friendliness or ease to use or an additional function. That's the harsh reality of the user of today. Ignorance is a bliss, and for many users it is. Look at the recent Pokemon hype. Everyone that accepted that agreed that the company behind Pokemon has the right to export the data you share with them to a country that is less prone to privacy laws. It's in the statement of the agreement. So they can export that data, you agree on it, to a country where privacy laws are close to non-existent. And then do with the data you shared whatever they like, regardless of the law you have in your country. So users choose that. So of course, both are right, and I agree partly with what Rufus said. Data at Google is probably better secured than the data on my phone. That is true. But then, if I follow Bart, he's right too. So what should we do? Well, I think Rufus said it in combination with Jovan, is the first thing you said, and Bruce Schneier said it last year, was we need oversight, transparency, and accountability. Well, sometimes we get oversight. Transparency, it's very rare. We don't know about, Google is not transparent. And accountability, I'd like to see what happens if tomorrow another breach occurs where personal user information is publicly made available. Companies are not really held accountable for it. For all the leaks that we have seen, I've never seen a judge pronouncing something around accountability. And then if we look at what Johan said, we need awareness. I started awareness in 2004, and I now realize I'm doing this for 12 years, so I must be doing an incredibly bad job, because after 12 years, people are still as ignorant as before. So what do we need? Perhaps the first three parts, what Rufo said, and then look at the ecosystem and perhaps limit the ecosystem's power by some laws.
Okay.
If I may add a few things. So basically, Jennifer mentioned aggregation. This is very much related to big data. And big data is very useful, it can be very useful, and conclusions drawn from big data analytics can be very useful. But in practice, this is typically coupled with another very important area. This is what we have been discussing already. It's user profiling. So basically, who is doing big data analytics should apply proper anonymization techniques. And it should be fine. Then we draw conclusions about statistics, about something that can make our all the services more efficient and so on. But if you do that in combination with, which is typically happening with local profile, with user profiling, then basically you don't apply properly this anonymization, because you are interested, in fact, in profiles of individual users. And this is indeed what Google and other big over-the-top are doing. They are building massively user profiles, and they are selling that. Some people call Google the biggest advertising company in the world because they sell this data. So I would say that for user profiling, this is very privacy sensitive. We need to change the trends. So the current trends are very bad. We need to do that by regulation. So we need to regulate this area. For example, we should just to bring one idea, we should do the user profiling locally on endpoint devices, not centrally. So we can do that by simple software like plug-in in browsers or whatever, and then the users can control what constitutes the profile. If I want to delete some things from my profile, from search engines, for example, I can do that. So currently this is not the case, or at least it is not controlled by the users. Try to improve situation very seriously there in profiling of users.
You should keep it.
Thank you very much. I think we are talking about different things, because if we want to try to change Google's motivation, then we cannot do that without their willingness to apply. And of course, they won't change their location, meaning they are prone to US law, and this means that they're also not free in deciding on everything. But if we discuss, as Bart said, there are situations where we simply cannot accept such risks or security failures. For example, with the cars or with some critical infrastructures. Then I hope that we won't rely on the current trends, on what Google or others are offering. But this means the rebuilding, development from scratch for at least the high secure applications. This could be everything where, the police forces use their phones, the politicians and so, and it has not worked well. Non-controllable hardware from in the very bottom of the design, but they were not that usable, and so people want to communicate, and so this is also a failure. But then we should think, how much is possible? For example, of course, a map service can work without giving your location. You can look up where you want to go. Or, for example, Google taking a photo with the Google tablet needs the activation of the microphone. Why that? Because the app does not only take a photo, it can also have video taping, which where it makes sense to have the microphone. But people who don't want to be listened in their in their home, of course, cannot take photos with the Google app then. So there are alternatives, but on a very, well, on a level where we probably can do something, but this is not the real solution if we want high security, whether it's quality assurance or whatever. But this probably requires building from scratch new systems. And there, I question you, what about the affordability there? And is there something, has it be done, is there a market for companies, or is it something where the state should invest? And perhaps another idea on the disaster thing, I know from security consultants that they very often come into a company and there was an incident. A not so big incident, a tiny incident, like water on the floor, or some uncontrolled things where it's very easy to spot those for everybody who's not informed. Management can notice that, but and recognizing it's a problem. And then they find out this was a so controlled mini disaster that probably the employees did that only to make sure that management gets the message, and then they were allowed to get in the external security consultant. So a controlled disaster. But if we have only controlled disasters right now, then it's the fixing again. We have the hack and then the fix and the hack and the fix. So what is the right scale of a disaster where not everything is gone and people die and so on? So, by the way, my job as a privacy commissioner, I'm interested in not having privacy disasters, only for the notes.
Yeah, well, I mean, you said at the beginning, Google isn't moving it subject to US law. Now, we know in Brussels right now that Google being subject to EU law is quite a hot topic. So, I mean, just because a company's based in the US, we need to think globally, and jurisdictional issues, we'll probably come on to that after the coffee break. And
European laws and charter.
Yes, indeed.
They don't always match.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, did you want to try and answer that before we turn to our keynote?
No, I want to I think it was more to Jovan, although I think that Marit also made very interesting points. So first, this is a point made by Professor Hildebrand. She wrote also a very interesting book about this. I mean, we engineers, we try to build profiling systems which are privacy friendly. And then we have this anonymization, although there is the Article 29 report that tells us anonymization is a legal fiction. So why do we accept as engineers first legal fictions? Right? That's kind of not very good. But also the privacy profiling itself actually is a very big problem, whether it's done anonymous or not, because profiling can be used in good and very bad ways as well. I mean, in the physical world, there is certain terms of profiling we accept and we don't accept. For example, if you rent out a house, you can probably decide to give it to a certain person based on their income, but not based on their race or their sexual preference or so on. But apparently, if this happens in computer systems, then we suddenly have completely different criteria. And then it's actually, because it's all happening in data mining and there are coefficients and we don't understand, in fact, the ethical dimension is gone. It's suddenly accepted it's there. And then people start arguing whether, if it's data anonymized or whatever. So we actually look at very different criteria, and the core is profiling by itself a lot. And to respond to the Pokemon thing, so personally, again, I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. The lawyers have decided that consent is the basis for data processing, but I think this is nonsense, because people don't understand what they consent to. And I think sometimes, I'm not very much in favor of strong regulation, but I think the state should protect the people against the consent they give. By the way, the privacy of user A affects also the privacy of the other user. So I think you should stop people from giving consent to crazy things. I mean, if I use a smartphone and my data and everything around me is collected and photos are collected, and this can go to any country, well, in fact, this user also consent to violate my privacy. And so I think at some moment people should be stopped from consenting to certain things. And I think just saying, this is consent and that's it, I think this is actually an abdication of our responsibility.
Okay, well, we're definitely going to pick up on some of those ideas after our coffee break in the next panel. And I also, for the next, just to give people a sort of prior warning, I want to then take it away so much from the big corporations and talk more about state actors, because you say you can force people to use Google Maps and not some others. They can't really force us. It's still some level, it's a consumer choice, but our governments and our security services can actually force us. So thank you very much for this. You're all back again after